For those of us who haven't yet listened to part 1 of our auction strategy podcast, you might want to catch up on that episode before listening to this one. Now, stay tuned for part 2 of our annual auction strategy podcast with guest Marc Winokur, next on Beat the Shift. I want to talk a little about hitter versus pitcher, and I think there's two things. People always ask the question, so what do you use for hitter versus pitcher? I think there's two questions there. It's number one, what do you put on your value sheet in terms of, you're doing your player values, is your player values add up to 70, 30, 65, 35? But then there's the question of, okay, that's what my player values say. How much am I actually going to allocate in my actual spend? I think there's two different questions there. Marc, what are your thoughts, and what do you do in terms of your value sheets versus what you actually will consider buying at the auction?
Yeah, I think this is one of the better bits of advice you've provided over the years. And, I've listened to all your auction strategy shows because, I think we're starting to get a lot more auction content, which I love. But it used to be very rare to get an auction. So I would be always honing in on that. I think the one thing you've really contributed to the discourse is this point that you have to make sure that your valuations are based on the market and what you're going to expect in the room. And you definitely say it more eloquently than me as far as if you are off in that, you're going to end up, thinking all hitters are overpriced and not get any, or all pitchers are underpriced and maybe get too many. And, again, you explain that a little better, so I'll let you do that. But I think if you don't go in with that knowledge of the market, your valuations are going to be way off from what people are paying, and that's going to really make it tough. So I actually will, in that download, I will then, say previous 5, 10 auctions, whatever it is, I'll download all of the AAVs, and then this is more of a manual. I'll put an Excel spreadsheet and just run a quick formula, and I'll get what the pitching hitting split has been on average for those 5 auctions. That's what I plug into the SGP calculator that then generates my valuation. So I know I'm at least basing my valuations on what the most recent auctions have been how they've been playing out. And I'll be honest, it often is really close. My first thing I do typically after the auction is I'll quickly tally it up, even by hand, just to know. And a lot of times what I had as the split, say 67-33, is within maybe a point either way. So I always like to just double check that. The second question is, what do I do? And I allocate a little differently. I think you've advocated for this as well. I want to go, I think you have to know what your strengths are. Are you good at finding late pitching? Are you good at finding late hitting? And, late is more of a, like a round, term, but, are you better at finding a $1 hitter or $1 or $2 pitcher? And so I honestly lean more towards pitching when I play. That just makes me feel more comfortable. So if I go in expecting a split of 165-95, I'll often be going 100 on pitching, maybe 105. Rarely will I go, more than $10 over. I can end up at 95 though too, depending on how the room is and if I'm able to pick off a few good buys. So I typically go more towards the pitching sides. For me, that's just where I think I can make more of an impact on my roster. But again, it really depends on that particular auction, and we know every auction is different. So I'll usually range about $5 over what I think the room is going to be on pitching.
Ruvain, I'll let you go first before I say my bit.
Well, I think first, if you do exactly what Marc just said, you go and look and see what the market is doing right now, what the split is based on what the market is doing. And then that's fine, that's great, put that on the side, but then look at your plan. See where you want to plug in your players. See where you have the hot spots. do a quote unquote mock draft of your own and plug in using those hotspots and see if those numbers are fitting with what the current market value is. And if it is fitting the current market value, then that's what you should go for. You go for. There's no reason in bucking the trend if you think you can hit your bargains in certain places. Like if the market's going, let's say 55-45 hitting pitching, that's fine. That's wonderful. But if you think that your plan fits to the fact that you can go, let's say 52-48 or 57-43, whatever it may be, you don't have to stick to it 100%. You have to see what your plan is, what the values of your players are, what areas you're going to be playing in, and just construct your own team. See where you want to put the money, and then after a while, you'll see, okay, you know what? Maybe I do have to move money from hitting to pitching or pitching to hitting. You'll see how it works based on where the hot spots are.
Yeah, I really agree with both of you, and I don't have much to add. I mean, just to rephrase the highlights, Ruben is right in there. In terms of your construction, when you do your plan and you see where the hot spots are, that's sort of going to dictate if you're going to spend a little bit extra on hitting or pitching to what the market is. I will, though, amend it by saying every auction is different. So if your particular auction is going a little bit differently, you got to adjust on the fly. If hitting is cheaper than you originally thought, yeah, then you're going to go a little bit more hitting, right? And yeah, in terms of constructing values, try to see what historically has been, and you want to guess and say, okay, I think the hitter-pitcher split has been 64-36. That's what I'm going to set it at. And yes, if you don't do that, if you value hitting too much, you're going to think, oh my goodness, I'm getting bargains in hitting. And you're going to think, oh my God, they're crazy. They're spending that much on pitching. Remember, it's a marketplace. It doesn't matter what you think. If everyone, imagine the exaggerated case, if everybody goes 90-10 on hitting, crap, then you're gonna think that your pitching is outstanding and your hitting sucks. But you still have to get both. You want to be optically indifferent to a bargain pitcher or a hitter. You just want on your value sheets when it comes up, you want just as many bargains as pitchers as there are hitters. What you actually do in the plan, that has to do with the construction of the plan for the hot spots. Now, we did talk about money management, and I think it's really important that you have to keep pace. And I see a lot of people playing the stars and scrubs deal and saying, okay, sure, I want to get my guys. I want Bobby Witt. I want this guy, get 2 high guys, and then they end up getting a bunch of dollars. I think that when you're planning to do that from the start, it's a mistake. And if you're going way over and you don't have money at any point at points in the draft, you're going to miss out on things. The most important thing, to use an economics term, is purchasing power. If you want to be able to have money so that if any bargain comes up in the middle of the draft at any point, earlier, middle, late, you want to have money to say, wow, that's a good bargain. Okay, it fits my budget because I can do it. If you spend too much and you don't get enough to have the $1 or $2 players at the bottom who can have $5, $6 bargains, that means that you won't get that, right? If you spent all your money, you can't afford yourself of that. If you spend too much early on, there's going to be some middle round values that are excellent. You already spent your money. You can't do that. The only way to be able to afford and to have purchasing power is if you're somewhere in the middle of the pack. You could be a little bit above, a little bit below, but it's got to be where if a bargain comes up, you're able to afford yourself and do it. Maybe a little bit. You want maybe even be a little bit higher than average, so that you want more purchasing power than anybody else. That if I can do it, I'm ahead. But it's very important to keep track of. Now, of course, you have to make the decisions that, wow, I know I'm low on money, but this guy is such a bargain. Then you have to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to make the purchase. I know I'll have less purchasing power elsewhere, but I won't get a bigger bargain than this. So you have to use that sort of opportunistic thing to know whether this is as good as it gets. But in general, you got to keep pace. Anything to add, Mark?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the live auctions are interesting. The players that come out and spend $200 in the first, say, 15 minutes, I call them Britney Spears auction players. They're like racing off to see Britney Spears perform somewhere out in Vegas. What is your rush? Like, where are you going?
Britney Spears shows your age.
Well, this was a few years ago. Now it's Adele. I don't know. Maybe it's a Dead and Company at the Sphere. Whoever it is, whoever your flavor is.
They're Swifties. That's what they are.
That's true. Actually, it is. They are Swifties now. So yeah, like what is your rush? Like I came to Vegas to do an auction for 4 hours. I didn't come to buy for 15 minutes, sit there for 2.5 hours, and then maybe come back in at the end. As you said, I want to be in it the whole time. Now listen, there are going to be some lulls. I tend to be like kind of high middle early, and then maybe lower middle, and then come back to be high middle. I try to balance it out that way, where I do have purchasing power throughout the whole. I might have a little less after I swoop in maybe just before the break or after the break, and that's where I'm hopefully getting most of my bargains. So I might take myself out of it for a round or two. But as you said, you never know what bargain's going to pop up. You never know when one of your targets is going to get called. That's the other interesting thing, is it's not like a snake draft. Within a few picks pretty much where every single player is going to go. Any player could get nominated at any time, and you might have certain guys that you were hoping to get, and all of a sudden you are out of the market on them. So you definitely don't want to do that. And yeah, I mean, listen, it certainly works for people. I've seen many strong players who go stars and scrubs, and they're massively successful. So whatever works for your strategy, if you're great at that end game and you could afford to start getting those $3-4 values late to kind of offset the overpays early, that could work out. That's just not how I play.
But there's also the fine balance of knowing when to spend the money, because if you spend it too late or too early, you don't want to be left with any money on the table, because after a while, after the room's not hot anymore, the problem is that there'll be a couple teams left going after a couple of players, and if you get outbid on those couple of players because you don't want to go over a certain value, then you're stuck with money, and you're stuck with too much money, and then you end up overpaying for the players later in the auction, and you're overpaying for them, and you lose all the value in them. And that's the problem. It's a very fine balance about when you want to spend and when you want to when you want to make your strike.
Do you deal with do you calculate in draft inflation, Mark? Because I know I don't. I don't. A lot of people say, "Oh, I want to know what the dollar inflation is." I don't. To me, it's about taking the temperature of the room and saying, "Okay, it's really hot now, and the hotter it is now, the colder it is later." Like the auction is a zero-sum game. If it's way hot early, it's going to be way colder later, and you always want to buy players in the colder parts, right? Because that's when you get the biggest bargain. So I don't really consider inflation. I know it from experience, but I look to take the temperature of the auction at various parts in the game and delve in that way. Well, what do you do?
Yeah, same. Total feel. If I was using auction software, which I know people do use in auction, it's calculating them for that, in real time, as long as you're linked up to the prices that are being paid, or you're entering them yourself. I just don't do that. It's more of a feel thing. I just want to go back to what Ravane said. I think it's a great point. I'm fortunate to have a 14-year-old son who's really into mostly fantasy football, but just auctions. He loves to auction. So he's, I mentioned earlier, I don't have a partner on online. I should amend that. He's my wingman, and he keeps kind of my price sheet active, and he's erasing and writing in new prices and making sure, I know what I have left at positions. But I find myself yelling at the computer when people aren't spending their money. And he's always like really puzzled by why I'm doing. Well, first of all, they can't hear me, but because when people don't spend their money, they're obviously screwed their team up. They're going to have money on the table, or they're going to be way overpaying for mid-level talent. But they also mess up the end game for everybody. So in a normal auction where everyone's spending kind of as expected, you can kind of have a little more of an expectation of what you're going to be finding later. But when you have one or maybe even two guys who haven't spent at all of those later bargains you think you're going to get are pretty much wiped away by these guys. Now ultimately they'll end up spending their money. If they don't leave it on the table, they'll spend it all in like a big whoosh. And they'll end up with all $5 and up players, no $1 to $4 players, and they might leave a few scraps for you. So that drives me absolutely insane. I know there's nothing you could do about it. Typically at the live events, you don't see that as much. You have some more seasoned players, but on the OLACs, you definitely have guys who will leave $5, $10, $15, $20. Either that, or they'll spend like $19 on a $1 player at the end, just so it doesn't show that they left on the table. That also drives me. Yeah, I mean, I just say take it like a man. Take it like a man. Bid $2, and you messed up. And also that messes up the AAV, right? Because you'll have certain guys that all of a sudden went for 19 in an auction when their AAV is 4 in every other auction. And if you're not recognizing that, all of a sudden they're at $6, not $4, and that could mess you up. So that's just a little pet peeve of auctions, but it does happen to people.
And this is what you should be doing at the breaks. They usually for a live auction or even the online one, they give you a couple minute breaks here and there, maybe 2 breaks during the course of the entire auction. It's during that time is when you're supposed to reassess how much money you have. If you're doing it by yourself, look around. How much money does everyone else have? What are they looking for? What are you looking for? Besides going to the bathroom, doing whatever you have to do, but you have to see what else, who's left. You have to. It's not that you're reassessing and recalculating how much money everyone's worth. It's assessing what's going on in the room. Like you mentioned, how hot the room is. You're not mentioning how hot the room is at this point. You want to see what people need. What are the needs for this team? Are they going to spend money on this guy? Why are they saving money? Are they saving money for a certain player that I'm saving money for? Oh, really? So maybe I should nominate the person right away. Get it off the table. Get their money off the table so I can go concentrate on somebody else.
So just a quick mention on keeper leagues. This is not really the point of this discussion today. We're doing auctions, but I know some people play in keeper leagues, and they're always asking, what do I put for keeper values and stuff like that. It's really complicated question to tell people because every keeper league is different. But the one thing, and I mentioned I don't keep track of inflation, but that's in-draft inflation. When you're talking about keepers, keeper inflation is real. And if a player ordinarily in a redraft league would be $45, when you take out the keepers that are kept at a bargain, because there's now less value to take, but there's actually more money in the field because people are purchased at a discount, that is real. There really is inflation, right? Inflation is defined as not enough, too much money for not enough goods. That's actually what happens in keeper leagues. So you really have to, when you do your auction values, you're not scaling to 260, you're scaling now to whatever the number is minus whatever the number is taken, right? You actually have to do the calculations for that. That is very important, and you might be used to a certain scenario where a guy's worth 45, but if you calculate the keeper inflation, it's really 50. You should be using 50 as your values. Don't actually use the 45 and say, well, but I still want the bargain. If I put the 50, then I'm going to lose the bargain because it's over. No. It's real. The keeper inflation is real, so really, really use it. Anything to add on keeper? It's not really a keeper discussion.
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I just wanted to go back to one thing Ruvain said about using the breaks to your advantage, and I totally think that's a great point. That's another advantage of the live events. They typically give you multiple 15-minute breaks, and you might even get a 5-minute break between the end of the auction and the reserve round. Online now, they only give you 1 5-minute break. There used to be 2. Now it's just 1 5-minute break and then a 2-minute a countdown from the end of the auction to the reserve round. So I find that pretty challenging to be able to have the that time to step back, with just 1 5-minute break. So just another plug for live events. It gives you a little more time to do that strategizing or that account taking at the breaks.
Well, a couple more topics to touch on, and hopefully you guys are all finding this interesting and very helpful. I want to talk about sort of the end game. There are some people who like to leave a bunch of dollars for the end, and I'll get a bunch of dollar picks. And some people who say, yeah, actually, I don't want dollar players. I'll take my last 2 guys at $3 and be done. I don't need the $1 players. What's your stance on that, Mark? Do you have a plan, or it's whatever the heck arises?
No, I have a plan. I don't like to have a lot of $1 players either. I don't mind a few, and I typically will look at previous auctions and just see, ones that I were in, or I'm able to see other auction boards, and I will quickly tally up the amount of $1 players. And if I see there's 45 $1 players, so each team is averaging 3, I don't mind having 1, 2, or 3 because that's in line with the room. That means we're all probably getting those, $3, $4 values that we talked about earlier. So I'm not losing too much ground there. If if you're up at the 5, 6, 7 $1 players and everyone else is getting, 3, then I think you are losing ground to other players. So I typically don't mind a few. Sometimes it's hard to judge whether a guy is worth 2 or just worth 1. End of the year, sometimes you look back and you just laugh at that $1 you were really sweating over, and you realize it meant absolutely no difference. So I like to have a few. I typically don't have the hammer. I almost never have the hammer, but I also almost never have $7 for 7 players, right? Like if I have six for my last 3 or 4, that's kind of where I like to be. That way, if I want to get a $3 or $4 player, as long as I can, fill out the rest with the dollars, that gives me that option. Or maybe I can get, 2 or 3 $2 players if I have a few preferences late and they happen to come up and I can snag them for two. So I think some players really want to hold that hammer. My issue is I don't want to pass up good buys earlier or mid draft just to have the hammer. If I'm able to get good buys throughout the draft, I don't feel like I need the hammer as much. I feel like I've already done most of my work during the auction. I'm going to get to my 300 or 320 valuation at the end, and I don't really need to worry about it. But you have to just know kind of your preference. Again, people who are really good end game players and have a great sense of those late player evaluations, they can go big early, and then they might have the hammer late because they sat out so long, and then they could scoop up a lot of really good players late and really balance out, again, those overpays. So I think just know your own strengths. For me personally, I don't really, prefer the hammer, and I don't want to just go crazy on $1 players either.
Yeah, no, it's good advice in terms of play to your tendencies and also, sort of be what the room is doing. You can't go wrong in that to keep pace. Ruvain, you have any thoughts? I have some mathematical thoughts, but you first.
Yeah, I like having the hammer at the end, but exactly like Mark said, with a caveat, you don't want to have the hammer and have too much money left over and then overspend on players, and you don't want to have the seven $1 players either, because that means you did something wrong. Because unless you planned it and you wanted to do stars and scrubs, and you said in the end, okay, I want to have these seven $1 players, but when someone makes a plan, it's very rare to make a plan with seven $1 players at the end. That means something went very wrong and something is not going the way that you expected it to go. That's probably it. Having the hammer is a good thing because you can still be able to scoop up those $7 $8 players for $2 $3, because most other teams have only $1 or $2 to play with. So yes, it's good to have that hammer, but you don't want the hammer to be too big that the money goes to waste.
So for me, it's about where the playing time is dropped off. And I want to be in a position where I don't want to get players, the bottom players in my roster that just don't have the playing time. Because remember, this really is a game about playing time, and the people who do well are people who amass playing time. So to me, it depends on league depth. If you're in a 15-team league, a mixed league, the drop-off in playing time occurs right at about the dollar mark, where that the reserve players start to have partial playing time, or they're crappy players with full playing time, right? It's somewhere right around there. So to me, having, $1 player, or maybe $1 or $2 players, it's about right. If you're playing in a mono league, the drop-off occurs much earlier. If you have $2 and $1 players, they don't get playing time. You're doing half shares. I don't want to end up with that. I don't want $1 or $2 players. My last players, I want to be at about $3 or $4. If I'm playing in a shallow mixed league, then the drop off occurs in the reserve rounds. So then I'm actually happy to have more dollar players. They're indifferent. I'm good with going more stars and scrubs, because even if I go to the reserve round, I'm still getting full players. So I think it really matters where the drop off in playing time is.
Yeah, playing time. When it comes to the end of the draft end game, it's always about playing time. Who's gonna is there a platoon? Are they playing full time? And it always comes down to that, and that's what you have to look for. Yes, you can take the hope at the end and get a guy who's in the minors and have him sit on your bench, which is another issue if you want to auction and buy someone in the auction or in the snake draft and have him waste a spot for a couple of months. But otherwise, it's playing time, playing time, playing time, because of the amount of injuries that go on. You have to have reserves ready to step in right away.
Let's talk nominations, which is probably one of our last big topics. And this is way more important than people think. And Mark, you've got sort of a multi-round plan in terms of who you want to nominate. So really interested in hearing your thoughts about, the general concept of who you want to nominate and what your actual multi-plan round is, without giving away too much, of course.
Yeah, and I definitely want to try to bring something, a little different to this conversation than kind of a previous one where I went through this. But I think generally, I think the big mistake people make is they nominate to quote unquote get money off the table, right? Money's coming off the table no matter on every player that's nominated. Just it depends on how much money's coming off the table and whose money's coming off the table. I want to nominate players that make other people pay more than I think that player's worth. That's the bottom line general principle. Now that's early in the auction because you can't just be predictable. You can't always be nominating players that you don't want. People will pick up on that. And even if they pick up on it, there's only so much they could do, right? But still, you want to be a little bit of a mystery. You don't want people to know if you want a guy or you don't want a guy. So you have to also mix it up. But early on, I'm nominating guys in the middle, say the $10 to $20 range that I see are maybe a $5 to $8 overpay that people are going to, if it's nominated early enough when the money is there and there's more competition for that player, that's when I want to nominate. The problem is that $15 player, if he gets nominated later, he might go for 15, which is fair. It's market value. But in my mind, I lost out on $5 that could have been spent by someone else by not nominating that player earlier, because obviously as the auction goes on, there's less competition for specific players because some people have less money, especially the stars and scrubs players. So I want to nominate players earlier on that, in my experience through the OLAX, I'll do a bunch of, OLAX before the big events, or I'll look at AAV, and I know that these are players that I don't really fancy, and I think other people are a little over exuberant on. If I nominate them early enough, more money will get off the table, and it won't be me getting off the table. So that's typically what I do. Another strategy is if I get a $30 player, I want to make sure other players in that tier at that position also go for $30. The worst thing to me is I paid market value for a third baseman at 30, and the other two third basemen that I have valuations at 30 go for 27. That drives me crazy. Sometimes you can't avoid it. If you might have misread the temperature of the room and you might have thought paying retail was the right play and it ended up not being. You can't always get it right. That'll happen pretty much in every auction, but it still bothers me. So I will try to quickly nominate a player at the same valuation, the same position, to create some price point pressure. That tier is starting to shrink, and that usually ensures that guy goes pretty close to that price that I just paid for a similar player. So I like to do that. And if you're managing your money properly, and you're getting people to overpay early, and you're getting your bargains here and there where they, show up, then kind of in the middle of the auction, that's when you're ready to strike. That's when guys you like that you've been waiting on are going to come up, and again, there's going to be less competition for them. That's where so that's where I'll start to nominate. I'll mix in a few guys that I like, especially if a tier is starting to close down. I don't want to be stuck with the last guy in the tier, so I'll look at the second or third guy. As long as I am, if I'm not ambivalent, like if out of the three guys I definitely have a preference, that can also dictate who I'll nominate. So looking at tiers, looking at overpriced players, making sure that there's enough market pressure for them to go at high values, trying to get off similar guys at similar price points, similar positions. So I think those are some of the major strategies that I like to use. The one thing is the end game. You have to pretty much be careful, right? Because that's when you have to really look at people's max bids and make sure you're not going to get stuck with like, ooh, I'm going to throw this $1 guy out that I really don't like because there's another $1 guy that I get later. And you're afraid to throw him out early because, you have to really get a feel for that. You don't want to get stuck at the end with any player you don't want. So you have to be careful there. And then you have to just figure out kind of the sequencing of those last few players that you have for either a dollar or two. And that's where the max bid feature can help. Live or online, you could see people's max bid. So people can only go to $2 and you have a $2 max bid, you want the guy, just bid two. No one can go over you, and you're good to go there. So late in the game, you're typically nominating players you want, and I think that's where the amount you nominate them for also matters. Just kind of checking out the room and seeing who could best you if they have the money.
A lot of great stuff there. I'd say the one overall thing is it's what Magnus Carlsen, the world's greatest chess player right now, says that he says every move should have a purpose. If you make a move, it's to defend, it's to attack a piece, it's to improve a position, to develop, whatever it is. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a reason for moving the piece. Don't just nominate, all right, let's just do this guy, or let's just do who's the next highest guy on the board. There's no purpose to that. If you nominate a guy that's going to have a high AAV and he's going to go for that AAV, then you nominating him and him going high doesn't do anything, right? You want to nominate players in a way to get players who you don't want to go even higher, or you want to nominate ways to get players to go lower than you should. And we've talked a lot on the show before about, if you're in, and Ruben mentioned it earlier, if there's four guys in a tier, if you want a guy, nominate a guy you want, get him first. Because when there's only one guy left in a tier, he's going to go for more than he should. Of course, if you've bought one guy in the tier, then nominate that next guy because they're going to go higher, right? You want to do things to make sure that the economic story is better for you artificially and worse for everybody else. And there's different things that you need to consider each time when you're nominating. You might have a strategy plan that's contingent upon a certain player. Don't wait. Nominate them first because you need to know if you have to pivot. If there's two players that are out there that are good bargains, but you like one better than the other, don't wait. Nominate the guy now because if the other guy comes up, you don't know what to bid. Should I bid? Should I get him? I don't know. That guy could still be. You don't know if they're going to last, if they're going to be available for bargains. You don't know. Get your plan A guy first. There's so many different reasons at each stage. Come up with the reason. Maybe you have too much money. You want to get, you need to get guys that you want. Maybe you just bought a high priced player and you're low on money. Well, the best strategy is you need to keep your purchasing power. I got a third baseman, throw out a third baseman, right? It's not necessarily just high guys or guys you don't like. It's got to be an economic reason. That's the general thing that I would suggest. Anything to add, Ruvain?
Yeah, don't nominate players that are in the tier of the position that you want because you're going to create the economic box like we can talk about. When you have the economic box, you're making that one player that you want worth more than when he appears to because everything else around him is not going to be available anymore. So you don't want to do that, even though you want to get an idea of what that area of players going for. Like you said, you have to have a reason of why you're nominating someone. Just don't throw someone out unless if the room is very hot and you know a certain player is way overpriced and it's not in a tier you're going for. Then yes, you can get money off the table. Like I think it was last year, me and you, Ira, we were not high on Ellie De La Cruz, and one of the rooms we were in was very hot. And that was a mistake. But we threw him out early. I'm just going to use him as an example because his ADP was way over what we were valuing him at. So if you know you're not going to play in that tier of position anyway, and you want to quote unquote get money off the table, that's where you do it. You do it where you know the ADP is much higher than what you value, and you're not going to play in that tier anyway. Plus, you also have to mix up. Don't just because you want to see how much someone goes for, don't always nominate players that you want either. If you always nominate players that you want, the rest of the room will click on to that. If you all of a sudden, you can see this online because you can see online who nominated the player and who ended up with the player. I don't know if people are actually going back and looking at the history, but you can do that and you can see what people are doing, and it could throw everything off. So there has to be a reason. You have to have a plan of what you're doing at least the first couple nominations. Also, don't nominate a third catcher if it's a 2-catcher league. Do not ever. You're laughing, but you're going to say, "Oh, well, someone's going to take him for 2." Who's to say they are? You never know that. And same with the utility guy. Oh, there's a utility guy. I'll bet $1. Someone will take him, and then all of a sudden they're crickets. Then you got a problem. Then you have a second utility guy. You have a wasted spot, and then what are you going to do?
That's interesting though, because I think at least the software prevents that from happening. You can't nominate a player that you can't put in a legal lineup spot. That's one thing we haven't actually mentioned yet, is that you have to leave your auction with 23 players
in the NFBC.
In NFBC, okay,
other leagues not so.
Okay, fair point. Just two quick things. One is one thing that could happen online, if you're keeping a queue going, which I typically do, I like to have my some nominations in there, and also some end game players. If you're not keeping an eye on your queue, and all of a sudden you kind of are looking at your sheet, and your nomination clock runs down, and maybe you get timed out, you might end up nominating one of your end game players way too early and end up kind of messing yourself up. So that's just a little online auction thing to keep an eye on. If you do keep a queue, I've definitely seen people auto nominate a player that they definitely were not planning on nominating there. So that's just one thing. The other thing was that I didn't mention as another early strategy, and oftentimes my first or second nom is usually more about gaining information than getting someone to overplay for a player or a position I'm not as fond of. And that is to kind of test the market, and that could be part of like a plan A you have. Like, I need to know right now on this player or this position for my plan A to work, so you throw it out there. I like to sometimes throw a closer or a catcher out early. Those to me are some of the more scarce positions, or at least the top closers, top catchers. I like to typically fish in those waters and get a top catcher and a top closer. So I really want to know what the market is going to look like for this particular auction. So I'll oftentimes throw out a catcher or a closer early. One that I'm definitely interested in, but is not like a must-have, because if the iron's hot right then, you're not going to get them. So don't throw maybe your favorite out right away, but throw someone who's similar that you could potentially live with if it's cold right away and you could grab. So also look at getting that information very early if you can.
Couple of very quick nomination tips dealing with economics. Like the stock market is usually down on Mondays and Januaries. So just to tell you some inefficiencies, when you're coming back from a break, very often the prices are depressed for the first two players. Good if you have a nomination, or good if somebody comes up that you want. Very often they're cheaper. So the very first two, maybe even three nominations after a break, a little bit of price depressed. The other thing is, if it's not exactly at the top, but in the middle or middle top or middle bottom of the drafts, if there's a run on a certain position, let's say second baseman. If you switch positions, you very often the first guy is also a little bit cheaper. So second. Throw out a pitcher if you want the pitcher. Then you know what? Let's do that. Get a pitcher. Very often you can get $1 or $2 bargain just by changing the position. A little bit of a market inefficiency. Now a couple of quick topics. Bidding. Question is how to bid. Might be a little bit different online versus in person, but what's your general bidding style? How often should you bid on players? What do you use as starting bid? And how quickly do you bid? Like, what's your whole bidding take, Mark?
Yeah, I know you have a more varied style of how you nominate and also bid. I'm typically pretty like nonplussed, kind of matter of fact. I could take it, I could leave it. That's just kind of like maybe my auction persona, at least in live auctions. I try to project my voice so the auctioneer can hear me, but I'm not necessarily trying to draw attention to myself necessarily. I think everyone will have a different style, and you should play to your kind of either play to your personality or play to counter your personality. If people know who you are and have an expectation, try to act a little bit differently. I think you should bid often. That's another mistake I see auction players. They only bid when they want a player, and it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly, right? So now I don't want to bid at like the top range of players because, again, I'm not a price enforcer and I don't want to get stuck. But early in the bidding, I will be trying to constantly throw bids out there. So people have maybe a misperception that I'm a pretty aggressive player when I'm really more of a balanced player, I think, in auction. So just like a poker table, I probably want to have an aggressive profile that doesn't necessarily translate to how I'm actually playing. So if you could not confuse people, but if they have a misperception of how you're playing the auction, that might end up helping you. They might end up getting caught price enforcing you. They think you've been bidding all along and you're super into this player, and then they go that extra $1 and all of a sudden it's going once, going twice on them, and then maybe it was a guy that they didn't want. So there's nothing finer than seeing someone price enforce you and get stuck with the player. Starting bids, just general principle, and I'm curious your thoughts, Ariel. I start lower if I want them, and I start higher if I don't. Now, that being said, that counteracts what I just said about not having a tell. So that's something I might have to work on this year, and
Yeah.
try to find a happy medium that's kind of in the middle of those two things. I can go either way. As I said that in the last pod, it made me start to realize that maybe I need to. I mean, I think it makes sense, but it's a tell, and I don't want to have a tell. So I think I need to fix that. And then I think the other one is really interesting is the timing of your bids. So there's basically three things you could do. You could immediately bid following someone else. You could wait till the very end till going twice, or you could just bid in the middle. I want to bid toward the extremes. I want to either come right over the top on someone and bid right away. That's kind of like a bully bid, and that could create some exasperation or even anger in the player if they're constantly getting bid up like immediately. And you want your competitors to have an emotional reaction, and that emotion could maybe drive them to less optimal decision making. Also, if you come in right at the very end, that could create absolute exasperation, and people might end up just giving up on the player because they don't want to just sit here and wait and have you, waste the clock down and do it again. So I like to either go right away or I like to go at the end. Now, that's typically on players I want. If it's someone I don't want, I'm not sure if I'm that extreme, but and then the last thing is you want to give your opponent less time to think. So whatever bidding strategy you come up with, the less time your opponent has to think it through, the better for you.
Yeah. Well, a couple things to say. To me, the general principle is you don't want to reveal tells, you don't want to reveal things. So the two ways to do that would be in general, and it's same true for poker. You either want to appear to be random or you want to appear to be monotonous. So, what's my opening poker bid? Do I bid one time double the blind? Do I bid 5 times the blind, throw it differently? Or do I say 3 times the blind, 3 times the blind, 3 times the blind? I think the better strategy of not giving tells in fantasy is being monotonous. So instead of starting bids, a little bit under, this over, close to the bid, just if 18, pick a number for the whole draft, 18, whatever it is, start it. Or if you're a little bit lower in the draft, 4. When you're monotonous, it appears, it's better than appearing random because there's no way to tell. So I like the kind of monotonous thing. In terms of bidding, you're right that you want to give less players to think. So in general, my monotonous way is quick. 5, 7, 9, 10. I just quickly. If I vary it, that's not good. I want to do the same thing every single time. The only thing I would say, though, is because if you want your opponents to think, if you want a price enforce or want to have a guy go higher, then you can bid slower, because the slower they think, there's a more likely chance that they'll bid up. A lot of times where, they bid 7, let's say you're towards the end, they bid 7, you bid 8 quickly, they might say, I'm out. But if they bid 7 and you go, hold on a second, 8, then they might think, oh, should I do it? All right, 9. You can get them to bid more if you do delay it a little bit. Usually I'm going to be monotonous, but if it's a price enforcing thing, maybe I'll be a little bit more in terms of bidding a little bit later.
I think there's also an aspect that we're not even talking about, the difference between bidding online and bidding in person. Bidding online, you can use all these different tones and everything like that, and you can put on a show. And Ira, you mentioned in past podcasts that you want to mesmerize the people or have them a little bit distracted by what you're doing, or crack a joke here and there, or say a funny word or something like that, just to throw them off a little bit. But when it comes to online, when you're not in person, I like to do like what Mark said. I want to leave the bully bid, meaning if there's a whole bunch of bidding and then it's just between you and someone else. If someone bids and you don't want this person, bid right away. Don't wait for the last second, because what if someone else out of the blue bids again, and then all of a sudden you're left with this player with, instead of $1 up, you're getting him for $2 or $3 up. So you really don't want to do that. You have to be very careful with the online bidding. So I think that's a big difference between the online and in person.
Hey, one thing I didn't quite understand, Mark. you play a lot of NFBC, and they have this kind of max bid thing, and I really don't understand it. Maybe you can explain it to me because I often see, and we saw this, Ruvain last year, where we're in a league and Zach Waxman appears to bid 17 and then 18 and then 19 and he bids 20 and he bids 21. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Can you explain to me how this max bid works?
Yes, I can. I think the intent was to make sure the auction goes quicker, which we've already discussed, like why. Like, what better do you have to do with your time than being an auction? So I think the general principle doesn't make sense, and I think that was their concern, was that for Acuna 1, 2, so max bid. The thing is, the max bid only makes it faster when people jump it. So let's say someone throws out Acuna for $1. This is last year, let's just say. If someone has like a $50 max bid on them, it doesn't automatically go from 1 to 50. If someone bids 30, then it goes 31 to the max bidder. If someone bids 40, it goes 41 to the max bidder. So it's not like Zach is bidding against himself. Someone else is bidding, but he's getting the priority because he has a max bid. So I think that's, and a lot of players will max bid up to AAV to make sure that players are getting up there. Some players, it's just on players they like. I almost never max bid during, because I think it's a tell, and I don't want to be giving away information. I like the cadence and the rhythm of normal bidding, and I don't want to just be jumping things up.
Like, can you change your max bid in the middle?
Yes, you can. You
Okay.
can pre-auction, you can go in there and populate the max bid. You're able to go in and cancel it or change it, and it's a really good point, because I've seen people get stuck with a player they probably didn't want because they forgot to take the max bid off. So if you're a serial max bidder, you oftentimes have to have a lot of in-auction work to be canceling max bids or changing them. The other thing I would say is, what if two people have a max bid? This is a little black box. I don't know if this is true, but I think that whoever put the max bid in first and saved it has priority. That's what it seems to be, because I've lost certain times at a max bid price to someone else, and that's the only thing I could think of. The auction software must have an idea. This is people are sick of hearing this, but you asked. In the end game, that's when you could manipulate it, and you can put a $2 max bid on a player. You can nominate them for $1. If no one else goes $2, you get them for $1, like any other normal bid. But if someone else goes $2 and you had the max bid in before them, it automatically gives them to you for $2.
Wait.
Yep.
Well,
yep,
hold a second. So it's your term to nominate.
Yep.
You can nominate a guy with a max bid too. Isn't that like cheating?
It's allowed.
Because why wouldn't you do that every single time if you want? Because what part of the time is, should I bid 1? Should I bid 2?
Right.
So you're saying
nominate
that
with 1 or 2. You mean nominate with
yeah,
1 or
should
2.
I nominate 1 or 2
Right.
in an auction? You're saying that if you want the guy and don't know what to do, you just put you nominate for 1 and do max bid 2. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. It's the old 1-2 maneuver.
That's not what it's supposed to be.
No, it's not. I think it's an unintended consequence. It's definitely a loophole. Hey, I've mentioned this now for a couple of years, so it's out there. I'm
Where's
not
Greg?
hiding that.
We gotta get Greg.
Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't looked into that. I think it's, and remember, it's not foolproof. I've already stated that. I have plenty of time. Not plenty of time. Majority of time it works. I'd say maybe a quarter of the time it doesn't work.
Well, then this is a very big thing that we're learning here on this show with NFBC here, because that's a huge part of the end game. Because then you don't have to worry about what your nomination is as long as you do 1 max 2.
That's right.
Wow, I don't actually believe it, but it really
give it a try when you jump in.
Wow. Well, we have to try this out, Ruvain, because this seems like a cheat code.
This is gonna be funny. Everyone's gonna have max bid of 2 on all these guys coming up here. It's gonna be like absolute chaos. Who gets some of these guys? It's gonna be fun.
You heard it first on the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs. All right, okay. Well, this is really helpful stuff. A couple of other quick things. Do you scout players beforehand? Does it matter to you, Mark, what other players' tendencies are, and how do you use that during the auction?
I think at the live events, it's a lot of the same players. And right now these auctions for Vegas are ridiculous. I mean, the quality of player is so high that these auctions, there's like 10 to 12 like excellent auction players. So you play with them over the years, and you definitely get a little bit of a feel for how they play. Stars and scrubs, spread the wealth. You get a little bit of a feel for the type of player or the type of roster construction they like to go for. So I don't have like a big spreadsheet where I track people. It's just more of an intuition or a feel or just a memory of how they play. As I mentioned earlier, if you're in at live events and you have an opportunity to sit in on an auction before yours, oftentimes some of those same players will be in that auction. One thing I definitely look at is if I'm in multiple auctions with a player, I will look back at previous auctions that we were in. I will look at, are they on the same guys I'm on? And if they are, that is something I need to know so I can make sure my expectation of a bargain might not be there. So I definitely look at previous auction boards of players that I know I'm going to play with and see if I can get any tendencies or just, more so players that they're on. I think when I'm in auction, as Ruvain said, like it's good to have someone else who can kind of be perusing the room for you and maybe feeding you some information. I find it hard when I'm the bidder, other than the person I'm maybe bidding against, to really get a lot of information. And oftentimes when I'm maybe not in a certain bidding situation with a player, I'm trying to catch up on my file or look at money, trying to catch up, and I'm not necessarily looking. So I probably could do a better job of getting some more information around the table. But I'm definitely scouting in the sense of if I know if I'm in an auction with you and I can see an auction board and know who you like, I'm definitely going to take that into account.
Yeah, I think it is important, if you can, to know the players' tendencies. Because I'm not going to call out NFBC players, but since they're experts, so sorry, I'm not calling anybody out. I just I don't want to talk about people. But for example, I play in the Tout Wars head-to-head, and Paul Sporer plays in it, and Frank Stample used to play. Paul Sporer does not play like me. Paul Sporer does a lot of stars and scrubs. So I ignore Paul during the auction. Like, if he's bidding on a player, I don't care, because he's not playing in any of the spaces I do. I play in the middle in Tout Wars. He plays in the top in the $1 players. We're never bidding against each other, so I can just ignore him, what he's doing. But a guy like Frank Stample, he's doing similar things to me. He's going after similar pockets. I have to worry how much money he has during the draft, because I want to have more money than him so I can get my guys, because he's going to be in bidding wars with me potentially. And when there's a player who high up goes, I'm happy when Frank wins the player, because that means less money for him. I don't want Paul to win players earlier, because I'm not going to be in competition with him. So it's important to know as far as there. The only thing I'd say also is, when creating your plan, it's very important to know what the pockets of players are based on who you're playing with. If you know, for example, everyone's bidding on these $40, $50 players at top, don't ever construct a plan that includes that. If you know that there's just so many $1 players, don't construct plans that have that. Construct plans for the pockets of values where people aren't playing. You want to do the opposite, because you want to have, like we said before, more purchasing power. You don't want to have competition, another economic term. Why do I want competition? I want to play where there's less competition, because you can get more bargains there. So if you can scout players and find out about their tendencies, and as you said, Mark, if you know certain players that they like or not, it is to your advantage. It's to your advantage in preparation, and it's to your advantage in auction. Move in.
I want to add a couple of things. Scouting players. First of all, scouting players. It's not just seeing their tendencies. When you let's say you're doing an NFBC and you're in a league, and you know who's in the league a couple days before, you know the draft order, everything like that, blah blah blah, fine. but you can also see what other leagues they're in. Are they doing more leagues? Are they doing one league? Are they doing multiple leagues? Do they have a history of doing multiple leagues? Because players who play in multiple leagues play a lot differently than the players who play in one or two leagues. Just because when players play in multiple leagues are betting on different players. Maybe they want to have the same players, maybe they want different players. So just because you scout them, if they do multiple leagues, maybe they want to share of this player and they want to share this player just to cover all their bases. Number two, where's the auction happening? Is it happening in New York, New Jersey? Is it happening in Vegas? Is it happening in Chicago? It needs to have it. Wherever they have it, you'll have some homers there. So a lot of times if you have homers, if you don't know the person, you never heard of the person, if they come in wearing a Cardinals jersey, if they come in wearing a Yankees paraphernalia, if you're in a home league, you would nominate local guys because you think the local guys would go for more in your league, and a lot of times that's true. But if you're in, let's say you go out to Vegas and a lot of people there from coming from LA, maybe you nominate Dodgers early. Maybe you nominate Giants early. There's certain things that you can play with the who's based on who's in your draft, and just scouting, it doesn't even take that long. Just look at the names, see if you recognize them, look at the list of other leagues, and you can find out plenty of information that way.
Yeah, the general thing is to extract any economic efficiencies or inefficiencies from the room. If you know that, I can extract value from nominating Mets and Yankees in a New York home league, you do that. Exactly right. Mark, if you wanted to sign up for an auction, other than making your own with your league, or maybe everyone can convince their league to give it a try, what are good places to sign up online in terms of doing an auction for this coming year?
I think if you're just starting out, like when I first started doing auctions, I was doing them on Yahoo. I just thought it was a really clean draft room and very intuitive, and the stakes for their public leagues are at a lower price point. It could get a little wild. Those tend to be really stars and scrubsies, and those leagues are trading leagues, which is very different than say NFBC. If you're ready to jump in at the $100 price point, playNFBC.com, and I'm getting nothing for saying that, of course, is where I go to play. And again, they have a great auction room, and there's a lot of good players there. But also, I think they have some soft spots. So I think you could definitely be successful there. So that's typically where I go. I would say if you do have a home league, definitely consider it. I commission for about 10 plus years a football league, and it's really hard. I've tried to convince people to go to auction, and typically in home leagues, at least the ones I've been in, people are pretty comfortable with what they know. They don't want to really spend the extra time it would take to kind of learn auction strategy and get valuation. So I think it's tough, but it's definitely maybe worth a try. I think NFBC is great. I think Yahoo has some good auctions, and you mentioned a couple other sites that have them as well.
All right. Well, this has been a fantastic show. Well, by the way, is there anything else that we didn't cover? I feel like we covered so many things here.
There's one more thing I want to add about where you can find the auctions. I don't think it matters where you play. I think it also matters how comfortable you are with the software, because NFBC, it's during the in season, looking up free agents, looking up values and stuff like that is very good to do that. Other websites are not so good. Other websites are harder to do fab during the course of the year. Mark, you mentioned about some players having problems with the software just during draft season. Before you sign up for any league, any website, anywhere, try it out. See if it works for you. See if you're comfortable with it. Ask around. See if other people have done it. Because if you get stuck, if you say you like the draft software but you hate the in-season stuff, then you're stuck with this league on a website that you're not comfortable with, and it ruins the fun. You have to be comfortable with the software, and that's the biggest thing. When it comes to auctions are fun. This is the fun part of the year. It's when everyone. This is the busy time for us. We love doing this. It's so much enjoyment out of this. But the whole thing is, there's another 6 months after this, and you have to be able to deal with the software with whatever website you use for the next 6 months. So make sure you're comfortable with that.
Anything else to add, Mark? I feel like we've gone through so many great topics today.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I better not wear my new Juan Soto jersey to the Vegas auctions after what Ruvain just said.
Well, we know you're not a Yankee fan, so it's fine. That's fine.
Oh man. Well, Mark, this was absolutely fantastic. I hope the listeners enjoyed because we have so many topics: beginner stuff, advanced stuff, and very deep thought into it. Definitely recommend you play it. I love playing auctions. I'm not exclusive auction, but the vast majority of my stuff is auctions. Mark, anything you want to? Maybe you can tell everybody where to find you on Twitter.
Yeah, it's MARC_WINOKUR. Not a great follow, I'm not going to lie, but I have my occasional moments. I would just say thank you for having me on. This was definitely, being on Beat the Shift is a fantasy bucket list for me, so I can't believe that tomorrow I get to actually listen to me on the show with the two of you. So I'm just really excited, and just thank you so much.
Oh, well, our pleasure for having you, really, seriously. This is a fantastic show. Ruvain, where can we find you?
You can follow me on Twitter X at MLB Injury Guru, where I'm going to start tweeting out more injury updates as they come as players start to report to spring training. I'll also have an in-season article for Rotoballer discussing the injuries every week to help you with your fab every week.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. I'm on the Twitter X machine at ATCNY. You can see my stuff at Fangraphs, at Rotoballer. ATC projections will be up on a whole host of sites this year, and it will drop in approximately 2 weeks or even a little bit less, actually, when you're hearing this. So really excited for that. Thank you so much once again, Marc Winokur, for coming on the show. Thanks, Ruvain, and thanks everybody for listening. We will be with you through this draft season. We're going to do our player dives by position to show our ATC undervalued players. That's going to get started in the next couple of weeks, so tune into then. Thank you so much again. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.